Hi guys, you've been Central here, and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be looking at the season 25 opener, Remembrance of the Daleks, starring Sylvester McCoy as the Seventh Doctor. Now, before we get into this review, I just want to tell you a bit about this story, kind of now as behind the scenes, because it's quite an interesting one. So, because this was released in the second season of Sylvester McCoy's run, season 25, this was the beginning of this was the first story of the season 20, the Silver Jubilee year, or because it'd been going for 25 years, like a special date kind of thing. So obviously that meant that John Nathan Turner, the producer at the time, was getting prepared to create a story which ended up becoming Silver Nemesis, and Silver Nemesis was the third story in the thing. So you had Remembrance of the Daleks, then Happiness Patrol, then Silver Nemesis. And Silver Nemesis basically was like the celebration of 25 years. But unfortunately, nowadays, it is seen more as just another story. The problem with it is that for a lot of people, it's just not. It's a bit underwhelming as a story, because so past two anniversaries, the 10th and the 20th anniversary, we've had the three Doctors with the return of the second Doctor and the first Doctor, and then in the five Doctors, we got recurring villains, we got the recurring companions, and we got a couple of enemies, and even a couple of the Doctors to come back to reprise their role. However, in the 25th anniversary, the only thing that actually returns is the Cybermen, and there isn't really many callbacks to the original or the history of the show. So a lot of fans nowadays believe Remembrance should actually be known as the 25th anniversary, although I don't believe it's official, mainly because at the beginning we go back to 1963 in Totter's Lane, which was obviously where the first episode of Unearthly Child started. There's a couple of scenes, there's a scene where he calls the military people, which I'll get onto later. He calls the main leader of him Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart by accident, which is another callback to the John Pertwee and Troughton era. Obviously the Daleks return in this. Davros is in this, which I'll get onto a bit later on. And then there's a whole reason behind why the Doctor came to Earth and stuff like that. And there's even arguably the biggest Doctor Who reference inside Doctor Who, where just as Ace leaves the house, and then we cut to the TV and it says, "Oh yeah, next is our new science fiction program," and it says and then it cuts it away, which is the biggest reference to Doctor Who in Doctor Who ever, because it was practically saying it was an actual show. But I mean, obviously it wasn't actually fully said, so you never know. So yeah. Also, we also get the Coal Hill School to return, which appears in a couple of times in the new series, but was where Susan went to school in the first part of Unearthly Child. But so yeah, now actually into the review of the story, because this is quite a well-regarded story, which is arguably probably why it got put as the unofficial 25th anniversary. But yeah, this is Ace's first story. It's her second story, but it's her first story off-world, or not off-world, but somewhere else by herself. After the departure from Mel Bush, she became the new companion, and honestly, this is quite a good start for her. There's a couple of times in this show where you kind of have to wait a couple of episodes before the companion becomes you got to get a good sense of who they are, but you can tell who Ace is from this story. It's just an easy one. I also think this is a good story for the Daleks. So we'll go into the Daleks now. So if you don't know at this point in time, this was 1988. and this was the 5th story to feature Davros as within and the Daleks in the same story, with Genesis, Destiny, Resurrection, and Revelation all preceding it. So the Daleks in this are actually quite interesting. It's a good and interesting concept, which I wish they'd developed more if they'd gone into the new series, or not into the new series, if they'd continued on. I mean, so at the end of Revelation, we see that Davros was getting taken away by the Daleks and to get put on trial. So we learn that at the end of the trial, Davros actually wins wins the argument, and the Daleks give him full control. And so what he does is he creates the Dalek. He redesigns the Daleks, which he said he was going to do in Resurrection, made them a more powerful force, and then with the redesign that from Revelation, the Necros design, into the Imperial Daleks. However, a couple of Dalek purists, because the whole point of the Daleks is they're pure and they don't want to change how their ways. So a couple of the Daleks form a band of the original black design from Genesis and Pertwee era and stuff, and they form a group called the Renegade Daleks. Now, the Renegade Daleks and the Imperial Daleks are both come to Earth because they want the Hand of Omega, which is a device from the Time Lords used for time travel, which the Doctor restored on Earth when he first arrived. However, he obviously got took off world by the fact that Ian and Barbara entered his TARDIS, so he had to go off world. So, the Doctor's come back all this years later to finish what he'd started. This is also the beginning of what is known as the Andrew Cartmel plan, where after after the show had been in for 24 seasons before this, when we first actually meet the Time Lords at the end of season 6, all the way up until this point, we've seen that the Doctor's kind of getting beaten up by the Time Lords a little bit, and the Time Lords are dominating him. So this is where the Andrew Cartmel wanted him to have more mysteriousness again about him, and more background about him. Hence why in this he has the Hand of Omega, and then in Silver Nemesis, which I've mentioned, he has he has the Nemesis statue. So yeah. What else? I think a good part of this story is there's a couple of times where there's a betrayal, but there's also a couple of times when there's something that happens where it's really cool, because there's a betrayal with it there's a guy called Mike, I believe his name is, and he's been working with the military for the whole time, but then it turns out at one point that he's actually working with a group of humans, where the group of humans are unknowingly working with the Daleks, which they don't realise they're working with the Daleks, but they are unknowingly working with the Daleks, and he betrays them, and it's quite a good character moment for Ace, as she upset because she really trusted him and she liked Mike, and then he got betrayed, and it's quite a sad scene for Ace, because it's just quite a sad scene, not like a really sad scene, but it's just an unfortunate scene for Ace, and she was you can see that she genuinely trusted him throughout the story, and you can see that she's really quite upset with the fact that she trusted him and he betrayed them. Yeah. The other kind of plot twist is the Doctor. So throughout this whole time, the Doctor has been kind of manipulating the Dalek factions. So he clearly wanted one of the factions to win. So he was trying to manipulate it so that one got the Hand of Omega and one didn't, because he wanted the Imperials to have the Hand of Omega, and he didn't want the Renegade Daleks to have it. However, he didn't tell anybody this, so only really he knew about it. He never said it in a self-dialogue, so the audience knew what was going on. He never even told Ace. He didn't tell any of the military. So at the end, it ends up being quite a shocking reveal, because we didn't know about it. And when he turns out to have blown up Skaro and tricked Davros into destroying it, it was quite a shocking surprise. And I had watched the story a long time ago, but I can remember, so I could remember that scene. But some other people who hadn't seen this story before were probably quite surprised about that, and especially people at the time and stuff. So yeah, but since we've talked about Davros being tricked, we can move swiftly on to what I think is the biggest, like the worst part in the story, which is why when I did my ranking of Sylvester McCoy's era, ranked this one as an A tier rather than a S tier classics. One of my favourite Sylvester McCoy stories, and that is the inclusion of Davros. As I said before when I talk about the Daleks, this is the 5th story in a row where Davros has been in it. However, at least in all of the stories previous, Davros has been something new. Not something new, but he's been more of a presence. At this point in time, it felt like Ben Aronovich was going to make a cool Dalek story, because you can tell by the fact that the Daleks are in this a significant amount. And then at the end, John Nathan Turner went, "Oh yeah, by the way, we've contracted to get Terry Malloy to have to play Davros." So it's like fine, and he slots Davros in at the end. That's not to say that he doesn't do anything. I mean, Terry Malloy is on fine form again. I mean, he can always play Davros really well, and he's great in this. However, he's just underused, and it's unfair on him, because I think if he had either not been in this story, like, they could say, "Oh yeah, he's still around," like, they could even have kept the plot point in with him winning and becoming the Imperial Daleks leader and all that. That makes sense. But they didn't actually need him to be there. And the Emperor Dalek, which was what he was before, the Emperor Dalek turned out to be him. But if it was like the Emperor Dalek from Evil, and then which appeared in The Parting of the Ways, it would have been fine to just keep that in there, because it would have improved the original design, because it'd be a mobile unit. And also, the Doctor's not like, I mean, the reason that he got tricked was the arrogance of Davros, but the Daleks could have easily been tricked like that as well. So Davros didn't really need to be in it. Unlike other stories like Resurrection, Davros is a big part of that story and the revelation and stuff like that. But honestly, I think this is the one story where if they slotted out Davros, it would have improved the story, in the sense that it's not one of those things where it's like, if he wasn't in it, I wouldn't have minded. But the fact he is in it makes it better. It's one of those ones where the fact he's in it makes it slightly worse, because he's been underused. So yeah, last thing before we finish is the military. The military are kind of like the fact that they're kind of like the unit of this story. It feels like Ben Aronovich, when he wrote the story, was like, right, maybe because he was a fan of the show, I'm not exactly sure much about him, I just know he wrote this and Battlefield, but I'm assuming he was sort of a fan, considering that in Battlefield he wrote a lot about Unit and the Jon Pertwee era, and I think he was a fan of that era, and he probably grew up with that era, because in Remembrance of the Daleks, it feels like he wanted to use Unit quite significantly, and he really wanted to use Unit in the story. However, obviously, since he set it in 1963 and Unit wasn't formed until 1966, he couldn't physically use them in the story because it wouldn't make sense continuity wise. So as a stand-in, we've got all of these other people from the military, and they're actually quite good. I think it's the guy the main leader who was mistaken to be Brigadier, wasn't mistaken to be, but was, the Doctor said Brigadier rather than his name. I think it was Group Captain Gilmore, and yeah, he's quite a good character. He's kind of like the Brigadier, where he's skeptical of what the Doctor, he listens to what the Doctor says, but he's skeptical. And then you've got the people such as the two women that accompany the Doctor and Ace in a couple of scenes, where they kind of like the Joe Grant or Liz Shaw kind of character, where they just like go, come on, you need to listen to the Doctor, stuff like that, and that works quite well. And also it's also, yeah, it's just all, they're just quite good characters. I think the best part is they're just well rounded. Yeah. Oh yeah, and another thing, which back to Ace, I forgot to mention one of the most iconic scenes, which is really bad that I forgot this, but the most iconic scene in this story, which is the fact that the Daleks have chased Ace in the school, around the school, and she's gone up to one of the science labs, and then the Dalek comes in and goes, the small female or small child, or I think it's small female, located on level 3 or 4 or something, and then she's got this baseball bat. But the Doctor infused it with the power of the Hand of Omega, so it's actually quite a powerful baseball bat. And she says, "Who are you calling small?" And then basically just beats them all, and basically just destroys the Dalek. And it's actually quite a cool scene, obviously quite an iconic scene. But yeah, overall I prefer Battlefield, but this is a really good Dalek story. In my opinion, there's better stories out there in terms of Dalek stories, but like, it is a good story to get you into classic run. If you like Daleks and you want to get into classic, because I know a couple of people who like Doctor Who in the new series want to get into classic series, I advise watching Remembrance of the Daleks just to get you eased in, because there's a lot of fights, like in the new series when there's a lot of fighting and shooting. You also kind of get like the new episode, the Revolution of the Daleks. It's kind of similar. It's not similar to concept, but the Daleks attacking each other, two factions. That's quite similar. So yeah. But if you have enjoyed this video and you've watched the end, you like and subscribe, and yeah, go watch another video. But yeah, see you.